During the summer holidays, my parents sent me to the village to stay with my grandparents. It was an old place, forgotten by all, where time seemed to have stopped. The village was surrounded by dense forests, and fog often lay on its streets even during the day. My grandparents, John and Mary, were happy to see me, but their eyes hid a secret they didn't want to talk about. They never left the house after sunset and locked all the doors and windows at night. On the second day, I met the local kids, Mike, Emily, and Alex. They were cheerful and carefree, but when the conversation turned to the house at the edge of the village, their voices became quieter and their eyes more serious. "There lives an old lady," Mike said, "but no one has seen her face. She never goes outside, and some say she's long been dead." "But then, who walks around the house at night?" Emily asked, and her words sent shivers down my spine. "Let's go see," Alex suggested, but his voice trembled. We decided to visit the house the next evening. As we approached, the old wooden gate creaked open before us. The garden was full of withered plants, and the path to the house was covered with fallen leaves. The house stood in darkness, as if absorbing all the light around it. The windows were closed with black curtains, and there was no sign of any light. We entered inside, and the air was cold and heavy. In the hallway stood an old clock that struck a loud chime every minute, echoing throughout the house. We walked into the hall where there was an old piano, and suddenly it began to play by itself. The melody was slow and sad, and it seemed to draw all the joy from our hearts. Then we heard footsteps in the attic. They were slow but confident. We looked at each other and wordlessly decided to go upstairs. The stairs creaked under our weight, and each step seemed like an eternity. When we reached the attic, we found a room full of old dolls. They were arranged around the room and looked at us with empty eyes. We heard laughter. It was hoarse and old, and it came from a corner of the room. There, in an old armchair, sat the grandmother, Mrs. Wilson. Her face was wrinkled, and her eyes shone with an unearthly light. She told us that we had become part of her collection, and now we could never leave this house. We rushed to the exit, but the doors were already closed. I could hear my heart beating in my chest, and I realized we had to find another way out. Suddenly, Emily found a key that had fallen from a book on the shelf. We tried it in the lock, and the door opened. We ran out into the fresh air, and when we looked back, we saw that the house had disappeared. In its place was only an old foundation, covered with moss and grass. Mrs. Wilson was gone, and we never found out who she was and why her house had vanished. Since then, we never spoke of that house again. But every time I looked at the stars, I felt that somewhere out there, in the darkness of the night, she was still waiting for us.